He would rather walk into the dark than watch it take her. She would rather burn down her own life than let him. This is a story about a truth too dangerous to speak and a love too stubborn to stay silent. We begin now. The lights went out in the ministry at 17 minutes past 9, and by the time they came back, Everard Pike was dead on the marble, and Draco Malfoy was the only living thing that had heard it happen. He remembered the dark first. Not the ordinary dark of a bedroom or a shuttered shop, but a dark with weight to it, engineered, poured into the level 4 corridor like ink into a glass of water. The wall sconces had guttered all at once, not flickered, died, and the enchanted windows that mimicked a summer evening had gone black as slate. Draco had been walking with a folder of estate documents pressed to his chest, the tooth of old parchment rasping against his shirt, and then the world simply closed its eyes. He had stopped. Sensible men stopped in the dark. He had reached for his wand and found it, and that small victory of cold wood against his palm was the last ordinary thing that night would grant him. Then the voice. It came from perhaps 10 feet ahead, low and even, shaping a curse he knew in his marrow. 2 syllables. Green light he could not see but could feel, gathering the way you feel a storm change the pressure in your teeth. And the thing that turned his blood to river water, the thing he would carry into every sleepless hour that followed, was not the curse. It was that he knew the voice. He knew it the way you know a song from a single held note. He had heard it across a courtroom, across a classroom, across 7 years of loathing and 1 long war. He had heard it call him ferret and coward and worse, and he had deserved most of it. He knew that voice the way you know the particular creak of your own front stair. And it was wrong. That was the part no one would ever believe. The voice was hers, but scraped hollow, stripped of the quick, fierce music that made it hers, flattened to a metronome, each word set down like a stone in a wall. He had heard men speak that way before. He had, God help him, spoken that way himself, once, with his father's hand on his shoulder and someone else's will threaded through his tongue. He had lunged toward the sound. He remembered that. He remembered his shin finding the sharp corner of a bench, the bright animal shock of it, his hand closing on empty air where a shoulder should have been. He remembered saying a name, hers, into the black, and getting no answer but the soft collapse of a body he could not see hitting the floor. Then the lights came up, and there was only Pike, folded on the marble with his eyes open and surprised, a thin trickle of something dark reaching toward the drain grate as though it had somewhere to be. And Draco, alone, on his knees, with his wand drawn, and no one else in the corridor at all. They found him like that. The interview room on level 2 had 1 long table, 2 chairs, and a window that showed nothing, because there was nothing behind it but the ministry's bones. Draco had been sitting in it for 2 hours when the door opened, and he did not need to look up to know who had come. He had spent 3 days refusing to say a single useful word, and the DMLE had run out of patience with polite functionaries and sent the one person on Earth guaranteed to make him talk, or to make him lie better. He hadn't decided yet. Malfoy. He looked up. Time had done its slow work on both of them. She wore ministry robes now, plum and severe. her hair bound back in a way that suggested she had stopped fighting it and started negotiating. There was a line between her brows that had not been there at 18, and a stillness to her that had. She set a case file on the table with a precise little snap and did not sit. "Granger," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Aura Granger, while we're on the record." She pulled the chair out and lowered herself into it with the care of someone who had learned that quick movements invited attack. Her eyes moved over him, the shadowed sockets, the 2 days of stubble, the tremor she surely noticed in the hand he'd flattened against the table to still it. "You look terrible." "I've been better." "You've been in a locked room accusing yourself of nothing and everyone else of nothing, which is a neat trick for a man who was found kneeling over a corpse with his wand out." She flipped the file open. "Talk me out of the obvious, Malfoy. I would genuinely like to be talked out of it." There it was. That was the thing about her he had forgotten in 3 years of not being in a room with her. The way she offered you the exit, as if fairness were a habit she couldn't break, even for someone she despised. It made the lie sit in his throat like a swallowed stone. "You would not like where the obvious leads," he thought. "You would not survive it, and I do not think I would either." "I didn't kill Pike," he said. "All right." She didn't blink. "Who did?" And here was the fork in the road, the place where a wiser man would have said, "I don't know," and gone home to Azkaban clean. Instead, Draco heard himself say the only true thing he could afford. "It was dark. I never saw a face." Her quill paused. "But you saw something." "I said, I never saw a face." "That isn't a no." She leaned in, and he caught the faint scent of her, parchment and ozone, the particular char that clings to someone who casts too much, all day for a living. It undid something in his chest he had spent years bolting shut. "You heard something. You're the sort of man who notices. You always were, even when it made you insufferable. What did you hear, Malfoy?" He looked at her mouth forming his name and thought about the voice in the dark that had worn her voice like a borrowed coat. He thought about the flat, dead cadence of it, the wrongness he could not prove, the memory he had no evidence for and no right to inflict on her. He thought, "If I tell you what I heard, you will spend the rest of your life certain you did a thing you cannot remember doing, and you will be half right, and it will end you." His knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. "I heard a curse," he said, "a man's voice." The lie left him clean and cold. "Low. Northern, maybe. I couldn't tell you more than that." Something flickered across her face. Not belief, not disbelief, but the alert stillness of a woman who has just heard a note played slightly out of tune and cannot yet name which string. She sat back. "A man's voice," she repeated. "Yes. Northern. I said maybe." She was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere in the building, a lift ground upward through its cables, and the sound of it filled the room like breathing. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Cooler, more careful, the voice of someone laying track ahead of a train she wasn't sure she wanted to ride. "Here's the trouble, Malfoy. A voice isn't a face. You can't pick a voice out of a photograph, and I can't put a lineup of throats in front of you and ask you to point. So the Wizengamot's given me a rather unusual mandate." She tapped the file. "We're going to reconstruct it. The corridor, the dark, the conditions exactly as they were, night after night, until you can tell me whether the voice you heard belongs to anyone we can name. You're going to stand in that black again, and I'm going to bring the world to you, one sound at a time. The room seemed to tilt. He kept his face very still, the way his mother had taught him, the way survival had taught him. Nightly, in the dark. With her, the one voice on earth he could not afford to hear again in that black, because he was not certain, that hearing it wouldn't finish what the corridor had started and drag the truth up out of him whole. "No," he said. Her eyebrows rose. "No, I won't do it. You don't have the option to refuse. You're a material witness and a person of interest, and the alternative to cooperating is a cell with your name already engraved on the door." She stood, gathering the file, and for just a moment, one moment he would turn over for weeks, her professional armor slipped, and something almost gentle showed through the gap. "I don't think you did it, Malfoy. I don't know why I don't. Everything on this table says I should. But I've been wrong about you exactly twice in my life, and both times it cost me. So give me something true. That's all I'm asking. One true thing." He looked at her, really looked, at the tired, brave line of her jaw, at the woman who had walked into a war and out the other side, and still could not stop offering her enemies a fair chance. And the true thing rose in him so violently he had to grip the table to keep from saying it. It was you. It was your voice, and it wasn't you. And I was too slow. I was one heartbeat too slow, and I have been drowning in that heartbeat ever since. "There's nothing true I can give you," he said, "that you'd thank me for." The gentleness went out of her face like a snuffed wick. "The first reconstruction is tomorrow night," she said. "All business now, already turning for the door. 9 o'clock, level 4. Wear something you don't mind ruining. It'll be cold and it'll be long." She paused with her hand on the frame and did not look back at him. "And Malfoy, I'm very good at hearing when someone's lying to me. You should know that going in." The door had nearly closed behind her when Draco, who had held his silence for 3 days against every interrogator the Ministry could throw at him, felt the first crack run through his resolve. Because the thing he was protecting her from was the very thing she was walking straight toward, and he had just agreed to hold the lamp. He pressed both hands flat to the cold table and made himself breathe until the tremor stopped. The corridor at night was a different country. Hermione arrived at 8:30 to prepare it, and the emptiness of level 4 after hours had a texture she had never got used to. The hollow echo of her own footsteps thrown back at her from too far away. The enchanted windows showing a false and starless dark. The long marble floor stretching off into a gloom that swallowed the reach of her wand light before it found the far wall. Somewhere beneath the polish, a stain had been scrubbed and re-scrubbed until it was only a memory of a stain, a faint discoloration in the shape of where a man had stopped being alive. She stood over it for a moment longer than the work required. She had read Pike's file until the words swam. Everard Pike, Under-Secretary for Reconstruction, 49 years old, a careful grey man who kept careful grey ledgers and had, by Avery account, no enemies worth the name. Not the sort anyone murdered, the sort who died in his bed at 80 with a knighthood and a dull obituary. And yet, Here was the discoloration in the marble, and here was the fact of it, stubborn as arithmetic. The lift chimed at the corridor's mouth. She did not turn. "You're early," she said. "So are you." Draco's footsteps came toward her, unhurried, and stopped a careful distance off. The distance, she noted, of a man who had spent a lifetime calculating exactly how close was too close. He'd taken her advice about the clothes. Plain dark wool, no signet ring tonight, nothing of the peacock left in him. The war had done that. It had taken the boy who dressed like a threat and left this, a pale, contained man who held his own stillness around him like a coat. "How does this work then? Your reconstruction?" She turned to face him at last. In the low light, his face was all angle and shadow, the sockets of his eyes gone to pools, and something in her chest gave an odd lurch she chose not to examine. Simply, to start, she lifted her wand. "I'm going to take the lights the way they went that night. All at once, no warning. You're going to stand where you stood, and then I'm going to speak and move, and you're going to tell me what matches and what doesn't. The gait of the footsteps, the distance of the voice, whether the dark sounds the same." She paused. "Tonight is only the room. We build the stage before we bring the players. Do you understand? You're going to make me stand in it again." "Yes." His jaw worked. In the gloom, she watched his hand rise halfway to his chest, as though to press against some old wound there, and then arrest itself and fall back to his side. He mastered whatever it was. She had to give him that. He mastered it fast. "Where?" he said. "Where did I stand?" She walked him to it, 6 feet from the discoloration, angled toward the far wall, his back to the lift. She positioned him with words rather than hands, unwilling for reasons she couldn't articulate to touch him, and when he was in place, she stepped back to the wall and put her hand on the sconce runes. "When you're ready," she said. "I will never be ready," he said. "Turn off the light." She did. The dark came down like a lid, not gradual. She had charmed it to fail all at once, exactly as the wards had failed that night, and the suddenness of it stole the corridor whole. The false windows died. Her own hand vanished in front of her face. For one disoriented instant, even Hermione, who had staged this, who knew every foot of the floor, felt the vertigo of it, the way the dark seemed to press inward against the eyes with an almost physical weight. And in the black, she heard him breathing, and the breathing was not steady. "Malfoy, I'm here." His voice came thin. Yes, I'm here. Tell me, is this the same? The quality of it, the dark?" A long silence. When he spoke again, the words came slow, dredged up. "It's the same. It's exactly the same, God help me. It has the same. There's no bottom to it. You can't tell where the walls are. You reach out, and there's just—" He stopped. She heard the soft scuff of his shoe as he shifted his weight. "Say something. Move. You said you'd move." She took a step to her left, deliberately, letting her heel come down hard on the marble. "Like this?" "No. Immediate. Certain. Not like that. The steps that night were lighter, closer to the floor. Someone who—" His breath snagged. Someone who wasn't trying to be quiet, but was quiet anyway. Small strides, not yours. Hermione went very still. Small strides. She had said move, and he had described a walk with such specificity, such terrible fluency, that it stopped the quill in her mind mid-word. He was not guessing. Whatever he was lying about, and she was more certain by the hour that he was lying about something, It was not the dark, and it was not the walk. He remembered those in his body. It was only the throat he'd hung his lie on. "You said a man's voice," she said into the black. "Yesterday, a man's voice, low, northern." "Yes. A man walks like a man, Malfoy. Heavier through the heel, longer in the stride. You just described someone light and close to the floor and small." She let it sit. "Small strides don't belong to your northern man." The silence that answered her had a different quality than the others. It was not the silence of a man reaching for memory. It was the silence of a man who had walked into a snare and felt the wire touch his ankle. "It was dark," he said finally, and she could hear him rebuilding the wall brick by careful brick. "You said it yourself. There's no bottom to it. I could have the footsteps wrong. Fear does strange things to distance." "It does," she agreed pleasantly, and lit her wand. The corridor sprang back into being, and there he was, 6 feet off, blinking against the sudden light with his pupils blown wide and black. And for a moment, before he composed himself, she saw straight through to the raw thing underneath. Not guilt, she thought. Not exactly, but a grief so old and so guarded that it had grown into the shape of him. A man does not look like that over a stranger. A man looks like that over someone he has failed. She filed it away where she filed everything, in the cold, clean drawer of her attention, and told herself it changed nothing. It changed something. They worked another 2 hours. She moved through the dark, and he corrected her, tirelessly, and each correction was a thread she pulled and wound onto the spool of what she knew. The voice, when he described it, was always low, always level. He returned to that word, level, again and again, and when she pressed him on it, on why a man committing murder would speak so evenly, he went quiet in a way that told her the word cost him more than the others. At 11:30, she called it. "That's enough for tonight." She brought the lights up full and permanent, and the ordinary brightness of the corridor felt garish after so long in the black, almost obscene. Draco stood swaying very slightly on his feet, wrung out, greyer than when he'd come. She had seen men look like that after interrogation, after the Cruciatus, after long stretches under a legilimens. He had done nothing tonight but stand in the dark and remember, and it had emptied him like a wound. "Same time tomorrow," she said, gathering her things. "Tomorrow I start bringing voices, recordings first, witnesses, staff, anyone who was in the building. You listen. You tell me yes or no. Recordings." His voice was flat. "You object?" "No." He said it too quickly. "No. Recordings are fine." She looked at him a beat too long. He was frightened of the recordings, and a man with a clean story feared nothing she could play him. But she was tired, and the hour was late, and she had learned in 3 years of this work that you did not spring a trap before it was ready. You let the animal grow comfortable with the shape of the cage. "Get some sleep, Malfoy," she said, more gently than she intended. "You look like something the Thestrals dragged in." He almost smiled. It was a terrible thing to see, that near smile, because it made him briefly young again, made him briefly the boy he might have been in some other war that had spared them both. Then it went out. "Granger." He said it as she reached the lift. She turned. He was standing where the man had died, though she didn't think he knew it, and the light was full on his face now with nothing to hide behind. "Whatever you find, however this ends." He stopped, started again. Don't. And there he foundered, the sentence dying in him, some enormous freight of meaning caught in his throat and refusing to be born. Don't what? His hands opened and closed at his sides. She watched him fight it, whatever it was, watched him win, and hated a little that he'd won. Don't stand in the dark alone, he said at last, which was not what he'd meant to say, which was so plainly not what he'd meant to say that it landed harder than the truth would have. If you're going to stage this every night, bring someone. It's not. That dark isn't safe. It doesn't leave you the way you came in. And before she could answer, before she could ask him what he knew about how that dark left a person, he had stepped past her into the lift and drawn the grille shut between them. And the last thing she saw as the cables took him up was his face turning away from her, jaw set, eyes fixed on nothing, a man holding a locked box shut against a flood. The lift rose. The corridor went quiet, and Hermione stood alone in the false starless dark of level 4, one hand rising unbidden to her temple, where a faint ache had started, small and bright, and shaped like the beginning of a memory that was not there. The recordings came in a black lacquered box, each voice sealed in its own small crystal file, and Hermione set them out on the table in the corridor like a row of specimens. "Ministry staff first," she said. Everyone signed into the building that night, then witnesses from Pike's department. Then. She hesitated and did not finish the then, because the then was a longer list than she wanted to speak aloud, and it included names she had not yet decided whether to voice. Draco stood over the files and looked at them the way a man looks at a row of teeth. "You play them in the dark," he said. "I play them in the dark, the same dark. You tell me nothing but yes or no. Is this the voice? Is this the cadence? Is this the thing you heard? No explanations, just the animal answer before your mind has time to build a case." She met his eyes. "I want the part of you that recognized the walk, not the part that argues with me about northern men." Something crossed his face at that. He had not forgotten the walk then, and neither had she. It sat between them, that small betrayal of his own memory, a loose thread they both kept touching. "Fine," he said. She turned off the light. The dark came down. She had grown almost used to it now, the sudden totality, the way the corridors stopped being a place and became a condition. She heard him breathe. She uncorked the first file, and a voice unspooled into the black. A night guard's voice, bored and flat, reciting his rounds for the record. It filled the corridor and faded. "No," Draco said. "You're certain?" "That's a man reading a list. The voice I heard wasn't reading anything. It was—" He stopped. She had learned the shape of his stopping now, could hear the place where the truth pressed up against the lie, and he chose the lie. "No. Next." She played the next. A clerk. A witch from records with a nasal lilt. A junior aura. Each one bloomed in the dark and died, and each one Draco dismissed, sometimes before the voice had finished its first sentence, and his certainty never wavered, until she reached the 7th file, and something changed. She did not know at first that she had changed it. She uncorked the 7th, a woman's voice, one of Pike's secretaries giving her statement. And the moment the voice reached a certain pitch, a certain hurried run of syllables, the ache in Hermione's temple flared white and sudden, and the corridor tilted. She was not in the corridor. She was somewhere else, some other dark, and there was a smell. Ozone, the burnt air char of a hex just cast, and a pressure at her temple, cold and small and round. The bite of silver against skin, a ring pressed there, and a voice she could not hear speaking words. She could not hear into the meat of her mind, and her own hand rising with her wand in it, against a will that was hers and not hers. And green. Granger. She came back to herself with her palm flat against the wall and her wand hand trembling, and the file's voice long finished, the corridor silent, and Draco's voice cutting through the dark, sharp with something that was not quite alarm and not quite fear, but shared a border with both. "Granger, answer me. I'm here." Her own voice came out thin. She hated how thin. The light's still off. Give me a moment. Bring it up." An order from him in her corridor. And the strange thing, the thing she would turn over later in the dark of her own flat, was that she almost obeyed it before she thought. Because there had been a raw command in it, a need, the voice of a man reaching for someone falling. "Granger, bring up the light." She brought up the light. He was closer than he had been. He had crossed half the distance between them in the dark. She saw it in where he stood, 6 feet become 3, and his hand was extended toward her, halfway across the gap, fingers open, arrested in the act of reaching. When the light found him, he snatched it back as though the air had burned it. But she had seen. She had seen him move toward her in the black without being able to see her, drawn to the sound of her going wrong. And there was no version of the last 3 years that explained why Draco Malfoy would cross a dark room to catch her. They stood looking at each other. Her heart was going hard against her ribs, and she told herself it was the memory, the ozone and silver thing that had surfaced and sunk, and knew it was only half that. "What happened?" he said, low, careful, and underneath the care, taut as a wire, dread. "Nothing." She straightened. She reached up and adjusted the clasp that bound her hair, though it did not need adjusting, though her fingers wanted something to do that was not shaking. "A headache. I've been staging this room too many nights running. It's nothing." "That wasn't nothing." "I said it was nothing, Malfoy." She heard the edge come into her voice and could not stop it. "You don't get to decide what happens in my own head. Sit down. We have 12 more files." But he did not sit down. He stood there with his snatched back hand curled at his side, and he looked at her with an expression she had no filing drawer for. Not the guilt, not the old grief, but something more terrible than either, a kind of tenderness so afraid of itself it could barely stand to be seen. He looked at her the way you look at a person standing near the edge of a great height who does not know the edge is there. "What did you hear?" he said. "Just now, in the dark, when the light was off." The question landed with a precision that frightened her, because she had told no one about the ache, about the fragments, about the ozone. She had not written it in any file. It lived nowhere but inside her skull. And here he was reaching straight for it as though he could see the shape of it through bone. "Why?" she said slowly. "Would you think I heard anything?" And there it was again, the stop, the place where the truth pressed up. She watched him arrive at it, watched the wire go taut in his jaw, watched him haul himself back from the edge of whatever he had nearly said. "Because you looked," he said, "like someone hearing a voice that isn't in the room." He turned away, picked up the 8th file from the table, held it out to her, a peace offering, a change of subject, an escape. "Play the next one. I'll do this all night if you want. Just play the next one." She took the file. Their fingers did not touch. He was careful about that, she'd noticed. Careful the way a man is careful around a wound. But the space where they didn't touch had a charge to it, a static that lifted the fine hairs on her arm, and she drew her hand back too fast and nearly dropped the crystal. "Malfoy." She did not know what she meant to ask. Something enormous had shifted in the room, and she could not name it. "Who are you protecting?" He went white, whiter than the war had left him. And for one long suspended moment, she thought she had it, thought the whole edifice was about to come down, thought he would tell her. And then his face closed like a door in a gale, and the man who had crossed a dark room to catch her was gone. And in his place stood the old Malfoy, the schooled one, the one who had learned at his father's knee to give a room nothing. "Myself," he said. "Same as always. Turn off the light, Granger." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she reached for the sconce runes, and as the corridor plunged again into that bottomless dark, she heard him let out a breath. Quiet, ragged, the sound of a man who has stepped back from a ledge and is not sure he's glad of it. And in the black between them, the static hummed, and the ozone memory stirred again far down where she could not reach it. And Hermione Granger stood in the dark she had built with her own hands and understood, with the cold clarity that had never once failed her, that she was standing much nearer the truth than she wanted to be, and that Draco Malfoy was standing between her and it with his whole trembling body. And she did not yet know why the second thing made her chest ache worse than the first. She stopped bringing the files on the 5th night. Instead, she brought people. Live voices, borrowed from the ministry roster one at a time, made to stand behind a black curtain at the corridor's end and read the same neutral passage aloud into the dark while Draco listened. It was more precise this way, she decided. A recording flattened a voice, robbed it of the small living tremors that the ear remembered, and Draco's ear remembered everything. So she stood him in the black and paraded the living past him, throat by throat, and watched him say no. He said no to a dozen voices that night. He said no with a fluency that had begun, she thought, to frighten even him, because a truthful witness grows less certain as the nights wear on, memory softening at the edges. But Draco grew more certain, more absolute, as though he were not matching voices against a memory at all, but against a single known answer he was determined never to name. She let the last borrowed voice go home at 11. Then she sat down on the cold marble with her back against the wall in the full light and patted the floor beside her. "Sit," she said. He didn't. "We're finished for the night. We're finished with the reconstruction. I want to talk to you off the record, and I can't do that while you're standing over me like a heron waiting for a fish." She tilted her head up at him. "Sit down, Malfoy. My neck hurts." He sat, not beside her, across from her, his own back to the far wall, 6 feet of marble between them, the width of the distance he always kept. He drew his knees up and rested his forearms across them, and in the plain light without the dark to hide in, he looked exhausted in a way that went past the body. A soul tiredness she recognized because she had worn it herself in the year after the war. "I've been doing this 11 years, she said. "Not the reconstruction. This, reading people, finding the loose thread and pulling it. And I've never once, in 11 years, met a witness like you." "I'm flattered." "Don't be. I don't mean it as a compliment." She studied him. "A guilty man lies to save himself, and the lie has a shape. It curls inward, everything bending toward I didn't. It wasn't me. Look elsewhere. Yours doesn't do that. Yours curls outward. Every lie you tell me points the light away from someone else, and you don't care where it lands, even when it lands on you." She let that sit. "You're not protecting yourself, Malfoy. You told me you were, 5 nights ago, and it was the worst lie you've told me yet, because you're a good liar about everything except that one thing. So I'll ask you again, and this time there's no record, no quill, no Wizengamot. Just the two of us, and a very dark corridor that neither of us can seem to leave." She leaned forward. "Who are you protecting?" His hands tightened on his forearms. She watched the knuckles go pale, watched the muscle jump in his jaw, watched him fight the same fight he'd fought every night and had, so far, always won. And she watched, this time, something in him begin to lose. "You have it wrong," he said, but quieter now, frayed. "Then tell me how." "I can't." "Why?" "Because it isn't mine to tell." The words tore out of him, louder than he'd meant, and the empty corridor threw them back. Tell, 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 down its long throat. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for a moment, mastered himself, dropped it. When he spoke again, he was quieter than the dark. "There is a person. Yes, there is a person. And if I say one word, one, of what I know, they are finished. Not accused, finished. And they don't even..." He stopped so hard she heard his teeth click. "They don't know. That's the worst of it. They walk around in the world not knowing, and the not knowing is the only mercy left to them, and I will not be the one to take it away." Hermione sat very still. She had come into this expecting many things. A confession, a stone wall, even, on the worst nights, the possibility that she had been wrong, and he was simply guilty. She had not expected this. A man ruining himself, deliberately, patiently, night after night, to protect someone who did not even know they were being protected. And a thought arrived, ugly and sudden and entirely unwelcome, and once arrived would not leave. A person he loves. Because that was what this was, wasn't it? That was the shape of it. You did not do this. You did not walk into Azkaban with your eyes open. You did not let a woman you'd once despised excavate you night after night. For a stranger. There was a person. There was someone Draco Malfoy loved enough to burn himself down to the wick over. And the wrongness she felt at the thought was so out of proportion, so entirely unlike anything her cold, clean drawers of attention could hold, that she looked down at her own hands to keep him from seeing her face. "You love them," she said. To her hands, not a question. Silence. She made herself look up. He was watching her with an expression she could not read. Could not, or would not, because reading it might mean naming the thing that had lodged like a splinter behind her sternum. And then, very slowly, he shook his head. Just once. "Not the way you mean," he said. And then, so low she almost lost it under the hum of the corridor's dead sconces. "Worse than that. Worse than that. What was worse than that?" She turned the phrase over and could not make it fit. And the not fitting was maddening. And underneath the maddening was a small, shameful flood of something that took her a moment to recognize as relief. And the relief frightened her more than anything he'd said, because relief meant she'd wanted an answer, meant the splinter behind her sternum had a name after all, and the name was one she had no business owning. Malfoy. Her voice had gone unsteady. She hated it. She reached up and straightened the clasp in her hair that did not need straightening, and caught herself doing it, and made herself stop. "I'm going to find out. You understand that. This is what I do. However long it takes, however deep you've buried it. I'll pull the thread, and it will come. And I would so much rather you handed it to me than that I dragged it out of you in a courtroom with the whole world watching. Whoever it is, whatever it is. Give it to me now, and let me help you carry it, because I am telling you, as someone who has carried things too heavy to carry alone, it will crush you. It is already crushing you. I can see it crushing you." She had not meant to say the last of it. It had come out of some place she kept locked, some place that remembered 18 and a war and the specific weight of surviving. And it reached him. She saw it reach him, saw his careful face crack down the middle, saw the raw thing underneath, saw him open his mouth with the truth finally rising in him, whole and terrible and unstoppable. And then the lift chimed at the corridor's mouth. They both turned. A junior Aura stood in the light of the open grille, a scroll in his hand, his young face apologetic and urgent. "Hermione Granger. Sorry. The forensics came back. The one trace on Pike." He held out the scroll. "You said the moment it came in, no matter the hour." Hermione got to her feet. Her legs did not want to hold her. She crossed the marble and took the scroll and broke the seal and unrolled it in the full light and read. She read it twice. The wand signature recovered from Everard Pike's body, the residue of the killing curse, the magical fingerprint that no witch or wizard could disguise or forge or wipe away, did not match Draco Malfoy. It matched a wand of vinewood and dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches, unyielding. It matched her own. The scroll trembled in her hands, and the corridor's light seemed suddenly very bright and very far away. And Hermione turned slowly, so slowly, to where Draco Malfoy still sat against the wall with his knees drawn up, and found that he was not looking at the scroll at all. He was looking at her, and on his face was not surprise, not confusion, not the shock of a man learning something new. On his face was the oldest expression she had ever seen him wear, older than the war, older than the loathing, a terrible, tender, grief-drowned knowing. And she understood, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, that whatever the scroll had just told her, he had known it all along. The junior Aura was still standing in the light of the lift, waiting for instruction, and Hermione heard herself say, from very far away, "Thank you. That's all. Go home." Her voice came out level. She did not know how it came out level. The grill drew shut and the cables took the boy up and away, and then it was only the two of them again in the long, bright corridor, and the scroll in her hand with her own wand written on it in the language of the dead. She looked at it again. Vine wood, dragon heartstring, 10 3/4, unyielding. There was no mistaking it. A wand signature was as singular as a soul. Ollivander himself had said so, standing in the ruin of his shop after the war, that a wand left its maker's mark and its wielder's mark both, and the two together could not be counterfeited by any craft she knew. Her wand had killed Everard Pike. "It's a mistake," she said, to the scroll, to the air. The trace degrades. It picks up ambient signatures. I've seen it happen. A wand that's been in a room can leave. Granger. Draco was on his feet. She had not heard him rise. He stood 4 feet from her now, closer than his careful distance ever allowed, and his hands were raised very slightly, palms out, the way you approach something that might bolt. "Put the scroll down." "It's a contamination artifact. It has to be, because the alternative is..." She stopped. The alternative stood in the room with them, enormous, and she could not look at it directly. "Because the alternative is that I was there, that I was in this corridor on the night of the 14th, which I was not. I was..." And here the floor of her certainty gave way beneath her, because she reached for the memory of where she had been on the night of the 14th and found nothing. A smooth blank, a wall of fog where an evening should have been. She had assumed all these nights that she'd been home. She had never checked. Why would she check? And now she reached for it, and it was gone, and the ache flared white at her temple, and the ozone smell rose up out of the floor of her mind like damp. The scroll slipped from her fingers. Draco caught it before it hit the marble. He'd moved without thought, snatched it out of the air, and now he stood holding the thing that damned her, and he did not look at it. He looked at her, and into the silence, very gently, with a gentleness that undid her more thoroughly than any accusation could have. He said, "You weren't yourself." The words landed and did not, at first, make sense. She stared at him. "What?" "That night. You weren't..." His jaw worked. He had guarded this so long that the guarding had become the shape of him, and she watched him tear it open now, deliberately, the way you tear open a wound to clean it. The voice I heard, in the dark, speaking the curse. He drew a breath that shook. "It was yours, Granger. I've known since the first night. I've known since before they put me in the interview room. It was your voice, and it wasn't you. It was flat, level, dead. I'd heard a voice like that before, from men with someone else's hand inside their heads, and I knew what it was the moment I heard it, and He stopped. His control broke all at once, the whole edifice of 5 nights and 3 days coming down in a single ragged breath. "I tried to reach you, in the dark. I tried to reach you, and I was 1 step too slow. 1 step, and by the time my hand found where you'd been, you were gone, and Pike was on the floor, and there was nothing. There was nothing I could do." He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the marble, at the scrubbed and re-scrubbed place where a man had died. "You didn't kill him. Someone put you under the Imperious and made your wand into their weapon and made your voice say the words, and you don't remember because they took it from you. They took the whole night out of your head, and the not remembering was the only kindness left in the world for you, and I was not going to be the one to stop. Her own voice, cracking. Stop. You're telling me I'm telling you, it wasn't you. Fierce now. He looked up, and the ferocity in his face frightened her, because it was not for himself. It had never once been for himself. It was your hand, and your wand, and your voice, and it was not you. Do you understand me? There is a difference, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered, and I have carried it alone for 3 weeks, so that you would never have to carry it at all. The corridor tilted. She put her hand against the wall to hold herself up, and the cold of the marble was the only real thing left, and she made herself think, made herself force the cold, clean machinery of her mind to turn over even as the ground fell away. The wand's signature is mine, she said slowly. The trace is mine, and your word, a witness under the imperious, no memory, no proof. She looked at him, and the whole architecture of what he had done assembled itself before her at last, terrible and complete. You can't prove it. The imperious. You can't prove anyone cast it. There's no trace for a curse that leaves no mark, and a victim who remembers nothing. It's your word, Draco, a Malfoy's word, a Death Eater's word, against a wand signature that says the war heroine did it. The pieces kept falling into place, faster now, sickeningly. So, if you told the truth, they wouldn't believe the imperious. They'd believe the wand. They'd take me. And you knew that. You knew from the first night that the only way to keep them from taking me was to give them someone else. Don't, he said, was to give them you. Granger. You were going to let them send you to Azkaban. She said it, and did not believe it, and believed it entirely, both at once. For a murder I committed, that you couldn't stop. That wasn't my fault. That wasn't your fault. You were going to walk into that cell and let the door close and never tell me why, and I was going to spend the rest of my life free and clean and never know. Her voice broke apart. You absolute! You coward! You were going to... What else was I supposed to do? It came out of him raw and hoarse, torn from somewhere below the composure, below the schooling, below 3 years of careful reconstruction. Watch them take you? Watch them put you in that place? You who walked into the war and pulled the rest of us out of the fire behind you. I was going to watch them lock you away for a thing that was done to you while the person who did it walked free? No. His hands were shaking. He didn't hide it now. No. If one of us has to fall into that dark Granger, then God as my witness, it is going to be the one of us who belongs there. And it was never, ever going to be you. The silence after that was enormous. They stood 4 feet apart in the bright, dead corridor and looked at each other, and everything that had been between them for 11 years, the loathing, the war, the long silence after, the 5 nights in the dark, all of it burned away in the space of that silence, and what was left underneath was something neither of them had a name for, something that had been building in the black corridor, throat by throat and look by look, and that now stood fully revealed and could not be unseen. She crossed the 4 feet. She did not decide to. Her body decided. She crossed the distance he had kept so carefully for 5 nights, and she took a fistful of his plain dark wool in her shaking hand, and she meant to strike him, or shake him, or scream at him. She did not know which, and instead she found herself pressing her forehead against his sternum and breathing in the ozone and wool smell of him. And his arms came around her slowly, disbelieving, as though she might vanish, as though he had wanted this so long and expected it so little that he could not trust his own hands with it. "I remember something," she whispered against his chest. "When the light goes off, I remember a ring, cold, against my temple, silver and ozone, and a voice I can't hear." She lifted her face. His was very close now, closer than it had ever been, the careful distance gone forever. "I'm going to remember all of it, Draco. You know I am. You've spent 5 nights digging it up without meaning to. And when I remember..." "When you remember," he said, and his voice had gone very low, and his hand had risen without permission to the side of her face, his thumb tracing the temple where the phantom ring still bit. "You'll go to them, to the Wizengamot. You'll confess a thing that was never your crime, and they'll take you instead of me, and everything I've done will have been for nothing. So, don't let me get there first." Her hand tightened in his wool. "Tell them the truth. Tonight. Both of us, together. They won't believe it. I've told you. They'll believe the wand. Then we make them believe it. We find who cast the curse. We find the ring, the silver, the voice you can't hear. We find them together before the trial, and we walk in with proof instead of your word. There's no time." His forehead came down against hers. His breath was unsteady on her mouth. "The arraignment is in 3 days. They've already got the wand trace. Granger, Hermione. There's no time to find anything. There's only time to choose who falls, and I have already chosen. I chose weeks ago. I chose the first night I heard your voice in the dark and knew it wasn't you. I won't let you. You can't stop me. Watch me." And they stood there, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's breath. 4 feet of careful distance collapsed to nothing at all. Each of them braced to fall into the dark in the other's place, and the space between their mouths had narrowed to almost nothing. A single held heartbeat, the static of 5 nights gathered to a point. When the lift chimed a second time at the mouth of the corridor, and the grille drew back, and 3 auras stepped out into the light with a warrant already unrolling in the lead one's hand, and the name upon it, read aloud into the ringing quiet, was not hers. It was his. They had moved faster than either of them. That was the cruelty of it. While Draco and Hermione stood pressed forehead to forehead in the dead corridor bargaining over who would fall, someone upstairs had already decided, had taken the wand trace and the witness's kneeling posture and the convenient shape of a Malfoy over a corpse, and stitched them into a warrant, and sent 3 auras down through the sleeping building to make an ending of it. The lead aura was a broad man named Corrigan, whom Hermione had trained beside, and he had the grace to look uncomfortable and the discipline not to let it stop him. "Draco Malfoy," he read, "you are charged under the statute of secrecy and the Wizengamot Criminal Code with the murder of Everard Pike, Under-Secretary for Reconstruction." "He didn't do it," Hermione said. The corridor went still. Corrigan looked up from the scroll. "Hermione Granger. He didn't do it. I have new evidence. The wand trace is... She stopped. She heard the trap close even as she stepped toward it. The wand trace is mine. She could say it. She could say it right now, 3 words, and end this, and take his place in the light of the lift. And she felt Draco go rigid beside her, felt the whole coiled length of him prepare to speak over her, to drown her words with a confession of his own, and she understood that if they both started talking now, in this ringing corridor, with no proof and no memory, and nothing but 2 people fighting to condemn themselves, it would help no one. It would give the Wizengamot 2 confessions and a wand signature, and let them pick whichever was more convenient, and the convenient one was written in vinewood and dragon heartstring, and it was hers. The wand trace is contaminated, she said instead. Her voice did not shake. She was proud, distantly, that it did not shake. The forensics are incomplete. I need 72 hours to complete them before any charge is filed. The charge is already filed, Aura Granger. I'm sorry. Corrigan's eyes moved between them. The 4 feet that were no longer 4 feet. The fistful of wool she had not quite let go. The whole electric wrongness of the 2 of them standing so close. And something in his face shifted, some private recalibration. You'll want to recuse yourself from this one, I think, whatever this is. Corrigan, Malfoy, your wand. Draco stepped forward before she could stop him. He surrendered his wand into Corrigan's open palm without a word, and the ordinary, awful sound of it, wood settling into a leather evidence sleeve, the small snap of the seal, was the loudest thing Hermione had ever heard. And then Draco turned to her in the light, with 3 auras watching, and he did the last thing she expected. He smiled. It was small and terrible, and it was, she realized, relieved. The smile of a man who has been holding a boulder over his head for 3 weeks, and has finally been allowed to set it down. Don't, he said to her very quietly so the others couldn't hear. Don't do the thing you're about to do. Draco, you confess in this corridor with no proof, and you don't save me. You just join me. 2 of us in the dark instead of 1, and the person who put us there still walking free with silver on his hand. His voice dropped further until it was almost nothing, until it was only for her. Give me the 72 hours, not to complete the forensics, to find him. You're the best there is. Everyone knows it. You'll find him in 3 days if you're not sitting in a cell beside me. So stay out of the cell. Find him. And if you can't... The smile flickered. If you can't, then it was always going to be me, and I'll go into that dark the way I should have gone years ago, and I'll go easier knowing you're on the outside of it. They put the manacles on him then. Ordinary iron, cold, and she watched the metal close around the wrists of a man who had spent 5 nights digging her own buried horror out of the ground so gently she hadn't felt the spade, and something in her chest tore clean through. I'll find him, she said. I know you will. 3 days. 3 days. And as they turned him toward the lift, as the auras closed around him, he looked back at her over his shoulder one last time, and the thing in his face was not fear and not despair, but a kind of fierce, absurd, impossible hope. Hope in her. Hope in the woman who had spent 5 nights trying to prove him a murderer. And then the grill drew shut, and the cables took him up into the dark of the ministry's throat, and Hermione Granger stood alone in the corridor where a man had died, with a wand in her hand that had killed him, and no memory of it at all. She did not go home. She went to see him twice in the 3 days that followed, in the holding cells beneath the Wizengamot, where the light was always the same weak grey, and the cold came up through the floor into your bones, and the second visit was the one she would carry. They put a table between them and a silencing ward around it, so they could speak, but no one could listen. And Draco sat on the far side in prison grey, with his wrists chained to a ring in the table. And he looked, in 3 days, 10 years older and somehow also younger. The composure worn away to show the boy underneath, the one who had never once, in all the years she'd known him, been allowed to simply be afraid. "I've got nothing," she said. She sat down hard. Her hands were raw from 3 days of chasing threads that snapped. The wand trace is airtight. The Imperious leaves no residue. There were no other signatures in the corridor, because whoever cast it stood behind the dark, behind the failed wards, and cast through them, and the wards ate their trace when they died. It's Draco. It's a perfect murder. Whoever built this knew exactly how the forensics work, knew exactly what would survive and what wouldn't, and they built it around me like a... Her voice cracked. Like a glove. Like I was made for it. A Muggle-born war heroine, the living symbol of everything they lost, made to kill a ministry official with her own hand and not even remember. Everything they lost. Draco had gone very still. Say that again. What? The living symbol of everything they lost. Who lost, Hermione? Who lost when the war ended? Who had the most to lose? His chained hands had curled into fists. This wasn't only about silencing Pike. If it were only that, you use a knife in an alley. You don't build a cathedral of a frame around the most beloved witch in Britain. This does 2 things. It kills Pike and it poisons the well. It makes the whole country look at their war heroine and think, even she is a murderer. Even she. So what was it all for? It's not just a murder. It's a message. The cold, clean machinery of her mind, silent for 3 days under the weight of grief, turned over at last and caught. It's propaganda written in a dead man's blood. Someone wants the country to lose faith in the new order, and there's no faster way than making its brightest symbol into its darkest. She stopped. Her breath left her. Pike. What was Pike working on? Reconstruction. Reparations. Draco's eyes had gone sharp, alive, the 2 of them thinking together now, fast, the way they'd once done across a classroom in fierce competition, and were doing now across a prison table in fierce alliance. The seized assets, the Death Eater vaults, broken up and redistributed to war victims. Pike sat on the Reparations Council. The name of it rose up in her like ice water. Pike audited the Reparations Council, and if someone on that council were quietly moving the money back into the old vaults, back to the old families, restoring the old order 1 ledger at a time, and Pike found the discrepancy. Then Pike had to die, Draco said softly. And the death had to do double duty, because that's how these men think. That's how they've always thought. My father thought exactly like this. You never spend a death on a single purpose when it can be made to serve 3. He leaned forward as far as the chains would let him. Who sits on the Reparations Council, Hermione? Who's the moderate? Who's the reformed one? The reasonable one? the one no one suspects, because he spent 3 years being so very publicly sorry. And the name arrived in both of them at once, and Hermione did not have to say it, and neither did he, because it was written on both their faces in the grey prison light, the smiling, silver-ringed, moderate face of the man who had stood before the Wizengamot after the war and wept such convincing tears. And in the same instant she saw the name land. Hermione's hand rose of its own accord to her temple, where the phantom ring bit cold and silver into her skin, and the ozone smell rose up out of the floor of her mind like a tide coming in, and the grey cell tilted. And she heard, for the first time, clearly, out of the fog where a whole night had been erased, a voice, speaking words into the meat of her mind, a man's voice, low, level, saying her name, and then saying, "Now, Miss Granger, turn off the light." And she came back to herself with her palms flat on the prison table, and Draco straining against his chains to reach her, and the memory no longer buried, but rising, rising, almost whole, almost surfaced, one heartbeat from breaking the surface into air. She almost had it. In the grey cell, with her palms flat on the table and Draco's chains snapping taut as he strained to reach her, the memory rose to within a breath of the surface. The voice, the ring, the words, "Turn off the light." And then a warder's key rattled in the lock, and the door banged open, and time was up, and the whole fragile thing sank back down into the fog before she could seize it whole. "No!" She grabbed for it. It slipped. "No, Draco, I almost had all of it. The voice, I heard it." "Visiting's finished, Aura Granger." The warder's hand was already on her shoulder. "The trial's tomorrow," she said to Draco over her shoulder as they drew her back. "I'll have it by tomorrow. I'll remember it all by tomorrow, and I'll bring proof. I'll bring the ledgers. I'll bring him." "Hermione." Draco's voice followed her to the door, steady, impossibly steady for a man in chains the night before his sentencing. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they decide." He held her eyes across the grey room until the last moment. It was worth it. The 5 nights. Even if this is where it ends, it was worth every one of them. The door closed on his face. She did not sleep. She spent the night in the Reparations Council's records room with a lit wand and a growing horror, pulling ledgers, and by 4 in the morning she had it. The money, the great slow river of seized gold that was supposed to flow outward to the war's victims, doubling back on itself in a dozen laundered channels, funneling home into 3 old pure-blood vaults, and the counter-signature on every rerouting authorization, small and precise and repeated, page after page after page, was the same. Ambrose Selwyn, moderate, reformed, the reasonable one, the one who had wept before the Wizengamot. But a counter-signature was not a murder. A ledger proved theft, not the imperious, not the ring, not the voice in the dark. It gave them motive and nothing more. And motive did not unlock a manacle. And by the time the grey dawn came up over London, she had a case that would ruin Selwyn's reputation and not save Draco's life, because the one trace was still hers, and the only thing on earth that could turn it was a memory she could not force to surface. She went to the trial with the ledgers under her arm, and the fog still sitting over the 14th of the month like a lid. The Wizengamot chamber was full. Word had travelled. The Malfoy heir, the murdered official, the war heroine leading the case. and the tiered benches were packed to the rafters with plum robes, and the light came down cold and greenish from the enchanted ceiling. And in the centre of it all, in the chained chair that had held his father before him, sat Draco Malfoy in prison grey, looking up at the assembled judges of his world with a calm that broke her heart, because she knew now what it cost him. She sat where the investigating officer sat. She was not supposed to speak unless called. She had gone to the chief warlock at dawn and demanded to enter the ledgers as evidence, and been told the reparations matter was a separate inquiry, immaterial to the fact of the wand trace. And she had stood in the corridor outside the chamber and understood that the trap was perfect after all, that Selwyn had built it so well that even the truth could not fit through the door. 3 rows up in the observer's gallery sat a silver-haired man with a kind, tired, sorrowful face, and on his right hand, catching the greenish light, a heavy silver ring. Ambrose Selwyn had come to watch. Of course he had come to watch. He had come to see his cathedral consecrated. The evidence went in. The wand trace, vine wood, dragon heartstring, 10 3/4, and a murmur ran through the chamber because they all knew whose wand that was, and the murmur was not for Draco. Hermione watched the confusion ripple through the benches and watched Selwyn, 3 rows up, permit himself the smallest smile, and understood that this was the moment he had built the whole thing toward, the moment the wand signature was read aloud, and every witch and wizard in Britain began, quietly, to wonder about their heroine. The chief warlock frowned at the parchment. The recovered signature is inconsistent with the accused. The signature, said the prosecutor smoothly, a man Hermione now suspected had been chosen as carefully as everything else, reflects the wand used, not the hand that held it. The accused was found over the body. The accused has refused for 3 weeks to account for his presence or name any other suspect. We submit that the accused acquired or borrowed the murder weapon precisely to obscure his own. That's absurd, Hermione said, on her feet before she knew she'd risen. You can't borrow a wand signature. The trace reflects the wielder. Everyone in this room knows it. Ollivander himself testified. Aurora Granger, you are not recognized. Then recognize me. Her voice rang off the greenstone. Because I am the investigating officer, and I am telling this court that the wand trace recovered from Everard Pike belongs to me, and that the man in that chair did not. The chamber erupted. It took the chief warlock a full minute to restore order, hammering the great gavel, and when the roar had subsided into a shocked and terrible quiet, he looked down at her with an expression of profound weariness. Aurora Granger, do you understand what you have just said before this court? I understand it perfectly. She was shaking. She made herself stop. The wand is mine. The trace is mine. And I have no memory of the 14th of this month because someone took it from me. Do you have proof of this imperious curse? The question landed in the quiet like a stone in a well, and she had none. The ledgers proved theft. Draco's word proved nothing. And the memory, the ring, the voice, the turn off the light, was still down in the fog, out of reach. And without it, she had only a confession of her own guilt and a wild claim she could not support. And she watched the chief warlock's face as he arrived at the only conclusion the evidence allowed. The court cannot admit an unprovable curse to overturn a verified wand trace, he said heavily. Aura Granger, your statement will be recorded and investigated separately, but it does not exculpate the accused, who was found at the scene and whose presence remains unexplained. Bailiff, the court finds sufficient cause. Bind the prisoner for transport to Azkaban pending final. The bailiff moved toward Draco with the manacles, and Draco, who had sat in silence through all of it, who had let her ruin herself before the whole court rather than speak one word to save himself, turned his head and looked at her across the green-lit chamber and mouthed, not aloud, only for her, "Don't let me. Go home, Hermione." The bailiff took his wrist. The cold iron touched his skin, and the memory broke the surface. It came all at once, the whole erased night rising up out of the fog entire. The corridor, the failing wards, the cold silver ring pressed to her temple from behind. The voice, low and level and kind, Selwyn's voice, saying into the meat of her mind, "Now, Miss Granger, turn off the light," and her own hand rising against a will that was not hers, and the words leaving her mouth like stones, and the green, and Draco's voice in the dark shouting her name one step too late. All of it, whole, unbearable, true. And Hermione Granger came back into the green-lit chamber, with the memory blazing behind her eyes and the first manacle closing around Draco Malfoy's wrist. And she did the thing she had been born to do, the thing no dark and no curse and no cathedral of a frame could stop her from doing. She told the truth. It was Selwyn. Her voice tore through the chamber, and it did not shake, and it did not break, and every head turned. Ambrose Selwyn cast the imperious curse on me in the level 4 corridor on the night of the 14th. He stood behind the failed wards with his silver ring against my temple, and he made me kill Everard Pike because Pike had found the money he'd been stealing back into the old vaults. I remember it. I remember all of it. I remember his voice. She flung out her arm, pointing up into the observer's gallery at the silver-haired man whose kind, sorrowful face had gone, in an instant, to chalk. His voice saying my name, saying, "Turn off the light. And if this court wants proof, then bring me a phial of Veritaserum and a pensive, and I will give you the whole night, every second of it. But you will take those manacles off that man, because he is innocent. He was always innocent. He spent 3 weeks letting you march him toward that cell, rather than let you take me." And in the roar that followed, in the chaos of the chief warlock hammering the gavel and the auras surging toward the gallery and the whole chamber rising to its feet, Ambrose Selwyn stood, very slowly, in the observer's box, and Hermione watched the kind, reformed, sorrowful mask fall away from his face at last, and beneath it was something ancient and cold and utterly unrepentant, the true face of the old order that had never once believed the war was lost, and his silver-ringed hand dropped toward the wand at his belt, and every aura in the chamber drew at once, and for one suspended heartbeat, the whole green-lit room hung on the edge of another death. Selwyn's hand never reached his wand. He was too old in the end for the speed the moment demanded, and there were a dozen auras in the chamber with their wands already up, and the first stunner took him in the chest before his fingers closed on the wood. He folded backward over the bench in a heap of plum robes, the silver ring skittering loose across the green stone, and the chamber's roar broke over the top of it like a wave. Hermione did not watch him fall. She was already moving, down from the officer's bench, across the floor, toward the chained chair at the center of it all, where Draco sat with one manacle closed around his wrist and the other hanging open, and the bailiff frozen between them, not knowing whether to finish binding a man. The whole court was now shouting, was innocent. "Take it off," she said. "Take it off him." The bailiff looked to the chief warlock. The chief warlock, an old man who had seen a great many strange things in that chamber and had the sense to know when the ground had shifted beneath him, brought the gavel down once, hard, and into the silence that followed. He said, "Release him, now, and someone get me a pensive and a truth draft before this court adjourns, because we are going to do this properly if it takes until midnight." They did it properly. It took until midnight. They gave her the Veritaserum in a small locked room off the chamber with 3 warlocks and a quill of record, and Draco standing in the corner where they'd let him stay, because she had refused, flatly, to give her memory to anyone unless he was in the room. And under the truth draft she gave them the whole night, poured it out of the pensive in silver thread, the corridor, the failing wards, the cold ring at her temple, Selwyn's kind level voice threading his will through hers. Turn off the light. And the warlocks watched it with their faces going greyer and greyer, and when it was finished, there was not one soul in that room who doubted a word of it. And the quill of record wrote, "Acquitted" beside Draco Malfoy's name, in letters that would stand in the archive for 100 years. They released him at 11 minutes to midnight. She was waiting outside the chamber doors when they brought him out. No chains now, no grey. They'd given him back his own clothes and his own wand, and he came through the great doors into the torchlit corridor, blinking like a man walking out of a cave into weather. And he stopped when he saw her, and neither of them moved. The corridor emptied around them. Warlocks, auras, clerks, the whole apparatus of justice draining away toward home and bed, until it was only the 2 of them standing 12 feet apart in the guttering torchlight, with 3 weeks of dark between them and no cell at the end of it anymore. "You did it," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You remembered. In front of the whole Wizengamot, with the manacle already on my wrist. You actually—" He stopped, shook his head, as though he still couldn't make it fit. "You gave them your own confession to save me. After I spent 3 weeks trying to make sure you'd never have to. You'd have let them take you." She heard the accusation in it and didn't soften it. "You'd have sat in that chair and let them chain you and walk you to a boat and lock you in that place for the rest of your life. And you'd have smiled about it. You were smiling about it, and you'd never have told me why. You'd have let me spend 50 years free and clean, and never knowing that a man had, that you had." Her voice cracked straight across the middle. "Why? I have asked you why for 3 weeks, and you've never once given me a straight answer, and I am done, Draco. I am done not knowing. Why?" And he crossed the 12 feet. He crossed the distance he had guarded for 5 nights and 3 weeks and 11 years. the careful distance he'd kept around himself like a moat, and he crossed it all at once, and he took her face in both his hands, hands that were shaking, hands that had been chained an hour ago, and he looked at her with everything finally, at last, unguarded, the whole 3 weeks of it, the whole 11 years, and he said, low and ragged and true, because from the first night in that corridor, when I heard your voice in the dark and knew it wasn't you, I couldn't do it. I couldn't let the dark have you. I have watched the dark take everything I ever cared about, my whole life, one thing at a time, and I could not, I would not, stand there one more time and watch it take you too. Not you. Not while there was a single thing left in me to put between you and it. His thumbs moved against her cheekbones. His forehead came down toward hers. That's the why, Hermione. That's the whole of it. I would have gone into that cell 1,000 times over rather than watch that dark close over you once. The torches guttered. The great emptied corridor held its breath around them. And Hermione Granger, who had spent 11 years filing this man in the cold, clean drawers of her attention as an enemy, and 3 weeks trying to prove him a murderer, and 5 nights standing beside him in a dark that had slowly, secretly undone every certainty she had. Hermione Granger reached up and took 2 fistfuls of his shirt, the way she had in the corridor the night she'd learned the truth. And this time there was no scroll to interrupt them, no lift chiming, no warrant, no chains, nothing at all left in the world to fall between them. She pulled him down and kissed him. It was not gentle. 3 weeks of it, 5 nights of it, 11 years of it, came up all at once and made it fierce. His hands sliding back into her hair, hers fisted in his shirt, the whole guarded distance he'd kept collapsing into nothing, into the warm living press of him, into the ozone and wool smell she'd come to know in the dark, and the unsteady catch of his breath against her mouth. He made a sound low in his throat, half disbelief and half surrender, and his arms came around her and pulled her in against him the way a man pulls in, the one thing he never let himself believe he'd be allowed to keep. And she felt the tremor go through his whole body and understood that this was the thing he'd been protecting all along, not from the Wizengamot, not from Selwyn, but from himself, from ever letting himself want it, from ever letting himself have it. When they finally broke apart, they were both unsteady, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the torchlight, and neither of them let go. "You're a fool," she whispered. "You're an absolute fool, Draco Malfoy. 3 weeks. You could have told me the first night. We could have found Selwyn together the first night. Instead, you nearly went to Azkaban to protect me from a truth I was always going to remember." "I know." His voice shook with something that was almost a laugh. "I've never claimed to be clever about this. You were always the clever one." His hand came up and traced the temple where the phantom ring had bitten, gently now, gently, as though he could erase the memory of it with his thumb. "Selwyn's in a cell. The ledgers you found tonight will finish him. 3 vaults, 12 laundered channels, and now attempted murder in open court in front of the entire Wizengamot. He'll never see daylight again. It's done, Hermione. It's over." "Not quite." She pulled back enough to look at him, and there was something in her face now that had not been there in 3 weeks. Not the cold, clean machinery, not the grief, but something warmer and more frightening, something that had grown in the dark corridor, throat by throat, and look by look, and refused, now, to be filed away. The council still has to be audited, the vaults recovered, the money returned to the people it was stolen from. Someone has to build the case that puts Selwyn away for good and unwinds everything he did. She tightened her fists in his shirt. And I don't intend to do it alone. No? No. You know how these men think. You said it yourself in the cell. My father thought exactly like this. You can see the shape of it from the inside in a way I never could. I've spent 3 weeks watching you carry an impossible thing alone, and I have decided I don't much care for it. Her voice steadied, and there was the old, fierce competitor in it now, and something else underneath, something that made him go very still. So, we do it together. The audit, the vaults, all of it, however long it takes. The Ministry will never let a Malfoy. The Ministry, she said, owes me a rather enormous favour after tonight, and I intend to spend all of it on you. And she smiled, the first true smile he'd seen from her in 3 weeks, and it undid him more thoroughly than the kiss had. Together, Draco. Say yes. And Draco Malfoy, who had spent his whole life being told what he was and what he could never be, who had walked to the edge of Azkaban rather than let the dark take the woman standing in front of him. Draco Malfoy looked at her in the guttering torchlight of the emptied chamber, with her fists in his shirt, and her truth still ringing in the archive, and her whole fierce, bright self offered to him like something he had no right to, and was going to take anyway. And he felt the last of the guarded distance go out of him for good, and he bent his head to hers, and against her mouth, so quiet it was almost only breath, he said, yes. And that single word, breathed against her mouth in the emptied chamber, was the beginning of everything that followed. They did it together, as she'd promised, though together turned out to mean something larger and stranger and more wonderful than either of them had bargained for. The audit of the Reparations Council took the better part of a year. Selwyn had built his cathedral of ledgers to be as difficult to unbuild as it was to see, and it wanted a mind like Hermione's to pull the first thread, and a mind like Draco's to know where the old families would have hidden the rest. He knew the shape of the vaults from the inside, knew the names that mattered and the ones that only pretended to, knew, with a knowledge that cost him something each time he used it, exactly how a man like Ambrose Selwyn thought about gold and blood and the world he believed was owed to him. And she knew everything else. Between them, over that long year of late nights and cold tea and parchment spread across every surface of a borrowed ministry office. They unwound the whole of it, vault by vault, channel by channel, until the great slow river of stolen reparations turned at last and began to flow outward again, home to the war's victims where it had always been meant to go. Selwyn was tried in the same green-lit chamber that had nearly swallowed Draco. He did not weep this time. The kind, reformed mask was gone for good, burned away in front of the whole Wizengamot the day his wand hand dropped toward his belt, and what stood in the chained chair now was only what had always been underneath. An old man who had never once believed the war was lost, who had spent 3 years playing at penitence while he tried to buy the old world back one ledger at a time, and who had been willing to reach into the mind of a muggle-born war heroine and use her own hand to murder a good grey man rather than let his theft see daylight. They gave him Azkaban for the rest of his natural life, and Hermione sat in the gallery and watched the manacles close around his silver ringless wrists, and felt no triumph, only a vast and settling quiet, the quiet of a thing at last set right. Draco sat beside her. He held her hand through all of it, in front of the whole court, and did not care who saw. The dark took a longer time to leave her than the trial did. That was the thing no verdict could fix. The 14th of the month, whole again now in her memory, sitting in her like a splinter of ice. She had killed a man, not by her will, not by her hand's own choosing, but the man was dead all the same, and it had been her wand and her voice that did it. And there were nights that first year when she woke with the ozone smell in her nose and the phantom ring at her temple, and could not, for a moment, remember which parts of the dark were real. And on those nights, she learned what Draco had always known, that the dark does not leave you the way you came in. But she did not stand in it alone. That was the difference. He had told her that second night in the corridor, "Don't stand in the dark alone," and he had meant it as a warning, and it had become, instead, a promise. On the nights the 14th came back for her, he was there, not with words, because words were never his gift and never hers. Not really, not for this. He was there with the simple, unspeaking weight of him beside her in the dark, his hand finding hers, his breathing steady enough to steer by. And she learned to come back from the edge by the sound of it, the way she had learned, in a ministry corridor a year before, to trust a man moving toward her through a black she couldn't see. They married in the spring, 2 years after the trial, in the gardens of a manor that had finally stopped feeling like a mausoleum. And if there were those in wizarding Britain who thought a Malfoy and a muggle-born heroine an impossible pairing, they said so more quietly every year, until at last they stopped saying it at all, because there is nothing the world grows used to faster than a thing that is plainly, stubbornly, undeniably true. And it was true. That was the whole of it in the end. It had grown up out of the dark in a ministry corridor, throat by throat, and look by silence, by held breath. And it turned out to be the truest thing either of them had ever found. The house they grew old in was full of lamps. That was the first thing anyone noticed, coming into it, the warmth of it, the light. Every room held 2 or 3, and they were lit at the smallest excuse, and no one who did not know the story ever thought to wonder why an old couple kept their home so bright against the evening. Their children had wondered when they were small. Their grandchildren wondered now. "Tell it again," said the youngest, a girl of 7 with her grandmother's hair and her grandfather's grey eyes, curled in the vast armchair by the fire with 2 of her cousins pressed in beside her. "The one about the dark." "You've heard it 100 times," said Draco from his chair. His hair had gone from silver blonde to only silver, and his face had softened in the way that hard faces sometimes do when they are finally, at long last, allowed to be happy. And he wore an old silver ring on his right hand that was not the one from the story. That one was locked in a ministry vault where it belonged, but a plain band that Hermione had given him on a spring morning 50 years gone. 101 then, said the girl. Please, Grandad. Hermione from the other chair laughed, the same quick, fierce music it had always been, gone soft at the edges now, but unmistakably hers. Go on, she said. You tell the beginning better than I do. You were the one in the dark. And so he told it, as he had told it 100 times, the way it was always told in that bright and lamp-lit house. How the lights had gone out in the ministry at 17 minutes past 9, and how in the dark he had heard a voice he knew, and how the voice had been wrong, and how a man had died, and everyone had thought it was him. He told it slowly, the way you tell a story you have told so often that it has worn smooth and comfortable as a riverstone. And the children listened the way children always listen to a story they know by heart, mouthing the important parts along with him. Turn off the light, they whispered. At the right moment, the three of them together, delighted, the words holding no terror at all anymore, worn down over 50 years of telling into nothing more frightening than the hush before sleep. And then Grandmother stood up in front of the whole court, the middle child prompted. And she remembered everything, Draco said, at the very last second, with the chains already on my wrist. She stood up in that terrible green room in front of every judge in Britain, and she told them the truth, even though the truth was the most dangerous thing she could possibly say, even though it meant confessing to a thing that would have destroyed anyone less brave. Because that is what your grandmother has always done. She tells the truth. It is the most frightening thing about her. He looked across the fire at Hermione, and 50 years fell away from his face. And for a moment the children saw, without understanding it, the way he had looked at her in a torchlit corridor with the whole world just saved. It is also the thing I love most. And then you kissed, said the youngest with enormous satisfaction. In the corridor, that's my favourite part. That's everyone's favourite part, said Hermione dryly. And then you caught the bad man, and you gave all the gold back, and you got married in the garden with the white flowers, and you lived. Happily ever after, the three of them chorused, in a house full of lights. In a house full of lights, Draco agreed. The fire settled. Outside the tall windows, the evening was coming down over the gardens, blue and then deeper blue, the ordinary dark of a summer night with nothing in it worse than owls. The youngest granddaughter yawned enormously and burrowed deeper into the chair, and her cousins had gone heavy-eyed beside her, and it was, by any measure, well past the hour when children should have been in bed. Grandad, the girl murmured, mostly asleep now. Why do we always keep the lamps on, even when it's not dark yet? And the two of them, the old woman and the old man who had found each other 50 years before in a black corridor where a man had died, looked at each other across the warm and glowing room, across a distance that had once been 6 feet of careful marble, and was now only the small comfortable space between 2 chairs by a fire. And something passed between them that the children were too young to read, the whole long story of it, the dark and the truth and the choosing, folded now into a single glance. Because your grandmother doesn't much care for the dark, Draco said softly, gathering the sleeping child up into his arms to carry her to bed. And Hermione rose and crossed the small space between the chairs and took his free hand in hers, the way she had taken it on 100 difficult nights, and would take it on however many they had left. And together they carried the children up through the bright, warm house, lamp by lamp, into the gentle, ordinary dark of sleep, and left every light behind them burning.
Thank you for staying with this story to the end. I want to tell you what I thought about while I was reading it. I keep thinking about one small moment. It is early in the story. The lights are off, Hermione feels sick and starts to fall, and Draco, who cannot see her in the dark, moves toward her anyway. He reaches out his hand. When the light comes back, he pulls his hand away fast, so she will not notice. That little moment in the story is a whole story for me. He loved her before he let himself know it. He moved toward her in the dark when no one was watching. While I was writing, I kept asking one question: what does love really look like? Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. And I think the answer is this: love is when you would rather stand in the dark yourself than watch it take someone else. That is the moral of the story. Real love is not always about words. Sometimes it is silence, sometimes it is one hand reaching out in the dark. Draco almost went to prison to protect her. He never asked for a thank you. That is law too. So here's my small wish for you. When someone you love in the dark, reach out your hand and do not be afraid to let them see it. Thank you for listening. Take care of each other.